At the heart of Clearhaven Lake stands a villa that has witnessed both love and loss, silence and storms. Once a sanctuary of dreams, it now carries the weight of unspoken memories. Eleanor Hale, 62, a retired architect and widow, returns after years away, her heart tethered to the echoes of her late husband, Thomas. To the outside world, she is merely an aging woman clinging to the past, but beneath the surface lies a resilience carved by decades of devotion and sacrifice. This home is more than walls and windows. It is the vessel of a life built together, a legacy written in stone and shadow. Yet the very people she once called family now circle like vultures, seeking to claim what is not theirs. They see her grief as weakness, her silence as surrender. But grief can also ignite fire, and in Eleanor's silence, something unyielding begins to rise. The long drive to Clearhaven had always been a ritual for Eleanor Hale, 2 quiet hours on winding roads where memory and anticipation met. Each curve brought her closer to the place that had held the essence of her life with Thomas, the villa by the lake, with its stone arches and quiet gardens, a refuge from the noise of the world. For her, the house was not simply a retreat but a living monument, every corner breathing with the echoes of love, laughter, and the unbreakable bond she had shared with her husband. Returning to it was never easy, but it was sacred, a pilgrimage of the heart. Yet when she arrived, the air felt wrong, disturbed. The gates stood open in a way that suggested not welcome but intrusion. Inside, the hum of unfamiliar voices carried through the hallways. What awaited her was not the stillness of memory but the sight of her daughter Vanessa, her son-in-law Derek, and his parents, Linda and Charles, already installed as if they were rightful heirs. They had taken seats not chosen at random but symbolic, claiming the chair Thomas once favored, pouring wine into the glasses Eleanor had carefully preserved, raising them in casual celebration, as though this legacy had always been theirs. Vanessa's eyes were cool, stripped of warmth, and her words cut without hesitation, as though her mother's presence was an inconvenience. Derek remained beside her like a shadow, quiet but complicit, his posture echoing agreement with every word unspoken. And Linda, sharp and unyielding, dressed her scorn as practicality, framing Eleanor's absence as selfishness, a burden upon the family that needed relief. Charles, silent yet approving, reinforced their stance with his very presence, a wall of authority meant to close Eleanor out. The betrayal was not in their words alone, but in the ease with which they dismissed her, in the confidence with which they assumed possession. They had not asked. They had not offered compromise. They had claimed, as if her love and her years of sacrifice carried no weight. To them, the house was no longer hers. It was opportunity. Eleanor did not answer. To engage would have been to diminish the gravity of the wound, to allow their justifications to stain what was hers by right and memory. Instead, she let silence be her shield. But silence did not mean surrender. Behind her steady expression lay a storm long denied, the simmering knowledge that those closest to her had crossed a line from which there was no return. In that moment, grief and fury intertwined, crystallizing into something sharper. What they mistook for weakness was the gathering of strength, and what they believed to be the end of her claim was only the beginning of her resolve. Eleanor had always believed that generosity was an investment, that kindness, when freely given, would eventually circle back in some quiet, meaningful way. For more than 10 years, she had poured herself into her daughter's life, not merely as a parent, but as a safety net against every misstep. When tuition costs swelled, Eleanor paid them without hesitation. When Vanessa desired independence, Eleanor purchased her an apartment so she would never feel small in the world. When debts appeared, Eleanor erased them in silence. But what had begun as love had slowly been recast as obligation. Vanessa no longer saw the sacrifices as gifts, but as dues her mother was bound to pay. That shift, that erosion of gratitude, had not been sudden. It was the slow corrosion of entitlement, and now it gleamed fully in the coldness of her daughter's words. Eleanor understood that confrontation would be futile. Her daughter's voice was already armed with rehearsed arguments, sharpened by the validation of Derek and his parents. To meet them head-on would be to step into their theater, to play the role of the unreasonable woman they already believed her to be. No, words were their weapon, and Eleanor would not play their game. She would create her own. Her first act was deliberate and precise, a call to Maya Torres. Time had carried them from their university days into different worlds, yet Eleanor trusted her more than anyone. Maya was not only a lawyer but a guardian of truth, a woman whose instincts were as sharp as her pen. With Maya's counsel, Eleanor began to assemble the quiet but unbreakable armor of ownership. Every deed, every clause, every line of legal defense was pulled into place like the stones of a fortress wall. The villa was not just a property, it was her legacy with Thomas, a chapter of their lives written in wood, stone, and memory. To lose it would be to let her love story vanish. But Eleanor also knew the battlefield was not confined to courts and documents. What her daughter and son-in-law sought was dominance, proof that she was weak, that they could take what was hers and strip her of dignity. If they lived under that illusion, then she needed to show them something stronger. And so she turned to Noah Kim. Noah was her neighbor, a quiet man with a brilliant mind, whose expertise in digital systems and network security often seemed like something from another world. He listened without judgment, and when she explained her situation, his eyes did not show pity but calculation. To him, the villa was not just a house but a puzzle to be solved, a canvas for innovation. Together, they designed the invisible shield. Motion sensors disguised in corners would detect every footstep. Speakers hidden in beams could whisper into silence, unnerving even the most defiant. Projectors, meticulously placed, could conjure figures of light and shadow, illusions designed to unsettle and intimidate. Even the irrigation system could be bent to her will, transforming into a force of disruption at the press of a button. Smart locks would answer only to her, reminding intruders that this sanctuary did not belong to them. Eleanor revealed nothing to her family. She kept her silence, allowing them to believe she was broken, that her retreat was surrender. But in truth, every quiet evening, every calm breath, was another step in her preparation. She was not planning a confrontation of noise and fury. She was building a theater of control, where every sound, every flicker of light, every locked door would whisper one undeniable truth. She wasn't going to fight with words. She was going to fight with strategy. Vanessa arrived with her entourage in the late afternoon, her suitcase wheels rattling like a declaration of conquest. Derek's shoulders were squared, carrying himself with the air of a man who believed victory had already been secured. Linda and Charles followed, their steps deliberate, the kind of parents who had always taught their son to claim what he wanted without hesitation. To them, the villa was not a home built on memory and love. It was a prize, a symbol of control. What they did not realize was that Eleanor, though absent in body, was more present than they could imagine. Miles away, her hands moved calmly across the screen of an iPad. Each tap was deliberate, each command issued with the precision of a general who did not need to shout to be heard. The villa, once a sanctuary of warmth, began to shift under her touch. Lights flickered at first like nervous candles, then snapped into a sharp rhythm, their pulses painting the walls with unease. It was not random, it was heartbeat, deliberate, a rhythm that quickened as the intruders moved deeper inside. For Vanessa, it was irritation. For Derek, confusion. But for Linda and Charles, it was dread. They were stepping into a house that did not welcome them. Then came the voice, deep and resonant, rising from the walls as if the stones themselves had learned to speak. It was not Eleanor's voice, nor one that could be dismissed as an echo of the living. It was the voice of authority, of judgment, declaring from the shadows, "You do not belong here." The words reverberated in their bones, low and inescapable, as if the villa itself was making its verdict. But Eleanor was not finished. She summoned Thomas. Not his body, of course, but his presence, a ghost carved from light and shadow. The projector came alive, weaving his familiar frame upon the walls, a silhouette walking with the slow, certain gait of a man who had once owned every corner of that house. To Vanessa, it was an unbearable reminder. To Derek, it was an accusation. And to Linda, who had hoped to erase the memory of the man who had chosen Eleanor over her own ambitions for her son, it was terror incarnate. Panic does not always erupt in screams. Sometimes it starts in silence, a tightening of the chest, the realization that one is no longer in control. The first scream tore free from Linda, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. Charles stumbled in his attempt to retreat, his legs betraying him as if the ground itself pushed him down. Derek rattled the front door, tugging and pulling, but the smart locks would not yield. They had entered easily, but leaving was no longer their decision to make. And then the storm. At Eleanor's touch, the irrigation system roared to life, but not as a gardener's tool. It became a weapon. Water erupted from hidden pipes and nozzles, a sudden, violent torrent that crashed against glass and skin. It was not gentle mist, but a barrage, drenching, overwhelming, breaking the last of their composure. The storm within the house mirrored the storm Eleanor carried in her heart, a force of nature reclaiming its territory. They tried to shout over it, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos. Vanessa's commands dissolved into the roar. Derek's bravado shattered into desperation. Linda's wail turned shrill, unmoored. Charles, soaked and defeated, scrambled on his hands and knees, unable to find balance. And above them all, the villa remained steady, a dark figure against the lightning of its own making, implacable, unforgiving. When the locks finally released, it was not mercy. It was dismissal. The door flung open as if spitting them out, and the four stumbled into the night, dripping and humiliated, fleeing not just from the villa but from something they could not name. They left behind the house as they had never seen it before, alive, unyielding, a monument to defiance. Inside, the villa fell quiet once more. The lights softened, the shadows stilled, and the voice went silent. It was not rage that lingered in its silence, but judgment. The house had spoken, and they had been found unworthy. The villa did not belong to them. It had never belonged to them, and now it had made that truth undeniable. Vanessa's fury did not wait. As the sun sank and the villa glistened with the damp scars of its rebellion, her voice carried across the phone line, sharp with accusation. "How could you do this to us?" But Eleanor did not rise to the bait. Her tone was steady, almost amused. She spoke of being in San Diego all weekend, of how the house must have suffered some inexplicable glitch. She let the silence afterward do its work, stretching wide, leaving Vanessa to choke on her own disbelief. For Eleanor knew what Vanessa could not admit aloud. They would not stop. The hunger had taken root, and the house was not their prize, it was their obsession. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her apartment, the weight of her decision pressing against her chest. For years she had fought small battles, deflecting greed with patience, shielding memory with quiet determination. But now the truth was undeniable. Her family, once bound by shared blood and tradition, had transformed into predators circling her sanctuary. The villa had defended itself once. It could do so again. Yet Eleanor understood the deeper truth. A fortress must be more than walls and wires. It must be secured by law, by principle, by the permanence of paper and ink. So she called Maya. Her lawyer's voice was calm, professional, but beneath it Eleanor heard the quiet solidarity of a woman who understood more than contracts. Together they discussed not only protection but transformation. The villa was not to be hoarded like treasure, nor surrendered to those who saw it as currency. It was to become what Thomas had always dreamed it could be, a place of renewal, of dignity, of second chances. Healing Horizons Foundation had been searching for a site to build a retreat for widows and veterans, those whose lives had been hollowed by grief and conflict. Eleanor's voice carried new steadiness as she spoke the words aloud. This was where the villa's future would lie. The documents were drafted swiftly, precise language crafted into an armor stronger than any lock or surveillance system. Eleanor read every clause, her eyes sharp, her heart calmer with each sentence. The terms were unyielding. The foundation would own the villa, but Eleanor would retain lifetime residency, her place within its walls untouchable. And most importantly, her blood relatives, no matter their maneuvers or machinations, would never hold claim over it again. When the papers slid across the polished surface of Maya's desk, Eleanor paused before signing. Her hand hovered, and for a fleeting moment she thought of Thomas, his laughter echoing in the garden, his presence lingering in the wood beams, his belief that the villa was not just a house but a legacy. She thought of the storm the house had unleashed, how it had roared in her defense when she could not be there. Now it was her turn to defend it, not with hidden systems or shadows of memory, but with the enduring certainty of law. The pen pressed to paper, and in that stroke Eleanor's resolve crystallized. The villa was no longer vulnerable, no longer dangling as bait before those who sought to consume it. It had been lifted out of reach, safeguarded by a cause larger than greed, anchored in service to others who had known loss and longing. As she leaned back, a quiet peace settled over her. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Eleanor felt the exhaustion lift. She was not surrendering the villa, she was freeing it. The house would stand as it always had, its walls steady, its spirit intact. But now it would carry new purpose, transcending the grasping hands of family and finding life in the healing of strangers. Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining the sound of laughter returning to the halls, not from those who schemed, but from those who needed solace. The house would no longer be battleground or prize. It would be sanctuary, and in making that choice, Eleanor had written the final chapter of her family's claim. The decision was made. The villa was no longer theirs to covet. It was at last untouchable. 1 month later, the world around the villa was no longer shrouded in silence or fear. News had spread quickly, first through neighborhood whispers, then through community newsletters, and finally across local headlines, that Eleanor had gifted her beloved villa to Healing Horizons Foundation. What had once been a story of inheritance, disputes had transformed into a tale of generosity, of one woman turning private history into shared hope. The community praised her choice, not just as an act of charity, but as an example of wisdom in an age when so many clung desperately to wealth and property. Strangers sent her letters of gratitude, some from widows who dreamed of peace, others from veterans searching for stability. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt the current of admiration flowing not for what she owned, but for what she chose to release. And then came the knock. Vanessa stood at the threshold, no longer draped in the armor of entitlement or resentment. Her voice trembled as she spoke, stripped of pretense. She admitted her blindness, confessed how greed had wrapped itself around her heart until she could see nothing else. She spoke not as a rival claimant, but as a daughter who had lost her way. The words fell heavy, threaded with regret, her eyes wet with the realization that her hunger had nearly devoured what mattered most. Eleanor listened, calm and steady. For all the turmoil that had passed, she did not allow bitterness to color her reply. Instead, her voice was firm, patient, touched by love but defined by truth. Forgiveness she offered freely, because holding anger served no one. But forgiveness, she knew, could not erase the need for boundaries. Respect, she told her daughter, was no longer negotiable. Affection without respect was poison, and family without integrity was nothing more than a hollow name. The words were not sharp, they were unyielding. And in their weight, Vanessa understood the lesson she had resisted for years. The days passed, and the villa settled into its new rhythm. Plans for its transformation began, architects walking its halls with fresh eyes, community members imagining what life it could hold. Yet Eleanor remained in her rightful place, her presence undisturbed, her connection unbroken. The house had been saved not only from intrusion but from misuse, anchored now to a purpose greater than possession. Its spirit, once threatened, now radiated with renewal. One evening, Eleanor sat upon the veranda, the air crisp with the scent of pine and water. The lake stretched before her, calm and glimmering, the surface mirroring the quiet strength she carried within. She breathed deeply, her body lightened by decisions made not in haste, but in clarity. A soft smile curved across her lips, not triumphant, not defiant, but serene. The voice within her heart rose like a gentle current. Sometimes love means setting limits. Sometimes peace means letting go. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living true to your values. With the villa standing tall behind her and the still lake before her, Eleanor had chosen not victory over others, but harmony within herself. And in that harmony, she discovered what her family never had, the unshakable freedom of living on her own terms.